Welcome to Truth Sentinel, watching over the truth in the news. And the news is one of the things that we talk about. We sometimes look at articles in the news, articles that may be related to mysteries, conspiracies, science, psychology, the future, paranormal, cover-ups, injustice. We look at articles and we discuss them, analyse them, and we invite you to do the same and to leave us voicemails on our voicemail system, which you can find at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. You'll also find the networks that you can click on and listen to us on various days of the week. And thank you to everyone who's listening on the networks and on YouTube. Please donate if you get the chance. It does help us out a lot. Just a reminder that you can contribute articles too. Any interesting articles that you come across that you think might be interesting for us to discuss, just post them in the chat room on our website and we'll have a look into them. So today we're going to talk to Anthony Kay and Philip Gardner, who's joined us before. And let's go over to Anthony first. So Anthony is our academic researcher, formerly from the University of Bilkent, but now residing near the origins of the Himalayas in Almaty, Kazakhstan, at 1,500 meters above sea level, near the highest ice rink in the world. Anthony.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Yeah, not too bad at all. So, Anthony, as you know, today we're going to be looking at articles that you and Phil and I have come across during the week that caught our attention, and I believe you have got some for us.
Indeed, I do. There have been quite a lot of interesting news articles in the press in the last week or two, and a few of them have caught my eye. Is Phil there yet?
Yeah, let's go and let's bring Phil in, and so he can listen to you explain the first article, and then we can discuss it. So let's just bring Phil in. Phil joined us before when we did a series about utopia, talking about how we would like to improve society, the changes we would make. Phil, hello, welcome back. Maybe you could introduce yourself to the listeners and tell everyone a bit about you.
Sure. Hi there, everyone. Got a bit of a varied background, actually, but I have a degree in history and sociology, a master's degree in sustainability and sustainable development. And right at the moment, I'm looking after a small permaculture project in the north of Portugal. But previous to that, I've been working in places like Ghana, on the Thai-Burmese border, and various other places around the world. And yeah, this is where I am at the moment, and just happy to join you guys.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
Can I just say at this point for new listeners, this is one of the things that I like about True Sentinel is that we are constantly out in the field, quote unquote. You know, whenever we have these chats, inevitably we find that that the people who are doing the chatting are just scattered about the world, which is really nice. Especially when we talk about international stories and we get to be in the places where they're happening.
Yeah, for sure. It's a international radio podcast. We've got Portugal, Kazakhstan and Thailand at the moment. I'm over here in Koh Samui, Thailand. So anyway, Anthony, you were going to introduce your first article, the one that caught your eye. What's it actually about?
Yeah, last week the BBC reported on a possible cure for a disease called fatal familial insomnia, or FFI. But this cure has brought up a really interesting issue. To give you some background, FFI is an inherited condition. It turns up in successive generations of the same families. And what happens to the sufferers is they basically stop sleeping, or they sleep like a few hours every few days. And then after kind of some months or maximum a couple of years of that, they die. Now, the disease can be dormant for years and years, and then it can suddenly turn up in your kind of middle ages. And people who go through the process describe it as a kind of waking coma. In that process, you have all kinds of unpleasant systems, or pretty much all your bodily systems break down. You get heart tremors and digestive problems and so on. So the BBC reported on this one guy, an Italian named Silvano, who died from this, but he left his brain to science, or specifically to the sleep clinic at the University of Bologna. And they've made quite a bit of progress studying this. They've worked mostly in the area of the thalamus, which is the part of the brain responsible for kind of acclimating us to our surroundings. So it looks after stuff like controlling body temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, all those things. And they think that it's the thalamus which helps us prepare for a night's sleep by winding down all of our systems, right? But when they cut open this guy Silvano's brain, his thalamus looked as though thousands of worms had bored through it. And this seems to have caused a whole bunch of his bodily systems to go haywire, which is why he couldn't sleep. So this problem kind of compounds itself, because while we sleep, we kind of cycle between REM sleep and slow wave sleep. In slow wave sleep, you get like low frequency oscillations of electrical activity flowing across your cortex. The cortex is kind of the rough outer casing of our brains. And that calms everything down inside, and then the brain can do important stuff like consolidating our memories and replenishing hormone supplies and things like this. But people with fatal insomnia don't get it, so they can never quite get to sleep, and instead they go into a sort of stupor. So none of that important brain activity happens. Their memory, their hormonal balance, and so on just keeps coming to pieces. So altogether pretty horrific, wouldn't you say?
I was going to say, I think I've got an overactive thalamus, because my brain shuts down quite quickly at night, and I usually sleep quite well. But after your story about worms boring into people's brains, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to sleep tonight.
Well, that wasn't literally what had happened. That's what the thalamus visually reminded the scientists of when they saw it. They were like, wow, it looks like worms have been in here, because it was completely shot through with holes that looked like burrows. But there was another case of a guy who was succumbing to this fatal insomnia in the US. He bought himself a camper van and went driving across the country. But after a while, he had to employ a nurse and a driver to travel with him. And he used to sleep for like very short periods inside a sensory deprivation tank, which was in his van. But he would wake up hallucinating and not knowing if he was still alive or if he died during the 15 minutes or so he'd been unconscious. With the new information they've got about this, the Italians think it might be worth trying to treat FFI with a drug called doxycycline. Now that drug was previously tried as a treatment for Creutzfeldt-Jakob syndrome. What they want to do is get hold of an extended family with a history of fatal insomnia and test about 10 members of the family between the ages of, say, 42 to 52 to see who's carrying the disease, right? And then treat them with doxycycline. So they've approached a couple of families about this. But the thing is, if they take a group of 10 people, probably less than half of them will actually have the disease, because it's kind of a selective condition. It only strikes a few people in each generation. So the families have said no on the grounds that they don't want to know the results. Because if you test positive, the news basically is, you've got an incurable disease, it's going to kill you, we don't know when, but we know that you won't live a long, happy life, and it will be a nightmare towards the end. So you can really understand why they're not so keen to take part. And it's put these doctors in a kind of dilemma. I don't know. I think it's just an interesting situation. I just wondered what you guys thought of it. If you had, say, a 30 or 40% chance of having an incurable fatal illness, would you want to find out about it in advance, or would you want to just live your life as if you didn't have it and just hope that you were right? And also, if you were one of the doctors, how much would you push the families to participate?
Because it's such a rare disease as well. You're in a really, as a doctor or one of the participants, it's a difficult choice to make. I mean, it's a difficult choice to make anyway, but because it's such a rare condition, how many people are going to benefit from the research that's done on you as a participant, plus like how much of the life you have left, if you are diagnosed with it, is going to be spent in hospitals running test after test and so on. Like it's a horrible situation to be in.
Yeah. I think the guy with the camper van probably had the right idea. Just go traveling and enjoy your time while you can.
Yeah, except I think he might have been in some kind of Hunter S. Thompson kind of reality for most of that time,
Yeah. I found it really interesting because I looked on the True Sentinel site and copied and pasted the URL, and I was reading about it. And it made me think a lot about how important sleep is. I used to know someone who was involved in lots of, what do they call it? Not sleep experiments, but sleep research, I guess, in Australia. And she was saying to me that they don't actually know that much about why the body needs sleep. They'd really just have theories. And the possible theories are inactivity. for the body. So it's a basic survival function, and it's keeping organisms inactive during the times of most danger, which is usually during nighttime, when it's more difficult to see predatory animals and that kind of thing. Another theory was energy conservation, which is fairly obvious. Another theory was restorative. So it's like a restorative function of the body to help the body kind of restore all the proteins and minerals and so on, and balance everything out. And then the other theory was brain plasticity, which is the effect that sleep and sleep deprivation have on people's ability to learn and perform a variety of tasks during your waking hours. And if your brain plasticity goes down, then it makes it more difficult for you to function, to learn simple tasks, and to perform simple tasks, and to learn new ways of living, I guess. They're all just theories, and they still don't know. They haven't got any concrete proof of actually why we sleep.
Yeah. This brain plasticity is one of the, I think, great, I would say, undersold breakthroughs of the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years. Because it was previously thought that the brain was kind of a steady state thing, and thoughts and ideas just flowed through it. But we actually know now that thoughts and ideas mold it. So the brain is a constantly changing organ, which is rewiring itself all the time to accommodate new ideas and learn new things. And you're right. Like if it becomes less, if the degree of plasticity is reduced, then you encounter all kinds of problems. You can't make new memories, you can't learn new skills, and so on and so on. Yeah, so it's a fascinating area, and there's still a lot of research being done there. I think we're at the beginning of something really huge there.
Yeah. I was going to say it moves into the area of the subconscious belief system, I guess, into the area of biochemistry and things like that. And there are a lot of people who are going into this kind of science and realizing that, for example, we know that consciously, our conscious brain is able to absorb or take in maybe about 3 or 4 pieces of information at any one time, which isn't very much if you think about it. But the subconscious brain is able to take in, I think, I'm not sure of the figure here, but I think it's 30,000 pieces of information in any 1 second, any one moment. And that's incredible. And that goes along with what you were just saying about the brain plasticity and the brain being molded by what's going on around us, and all of the information that's out there, all of the information that's constantly sort of bombarding our bodies, our brains, all the time. I'm really fascinated by this sort of area of research, because there are these guys who are talking about, again, biochemists, neuroscientists and so on, who are talking about how most of our character, our programs, our patterns, and everything is made up in our subconscious belief system. So what we do consciously is a very tiny fraction of what is actually going on inside our entire beings. Whereas subconsciously, there's all of this stuff going on that stretches all the way back to our birth, and all of the experiences we had since that time, especially on an emotional level. During the first sort of 7 years of your life, you are molded emotionally by all these different experiences that you have. And even if you're not consciously aware of something that your father or mother might be doing at the time, you're subconsciously, you are aware of it, and you pick up on all of their patterns. And so we basically inherit this kind of legacy of different patterns of behavior and patterns of thought and emotion from all these people around us during these first few years. And it's so for me, like this sort of the difference between the subconscious and the conscious minds is again just really fascinating.
Actually, Phil, that's made me think that would be a very good topic to do as an episode sometime. The subconscious mind. It's a powerful thing, and worth exploring, since it affects us. As you said, affects us all. So, Phil, you also have a topic, an article that caught your eye, and I wondered what that was about.
Yeah, it was about possession, I guess, and it just sort of cropped up in my mind because while I was on the Truth Sentinel website, it has you invited kind of guests to write down interesting articles and things like that.
Indeed,
so there was this.
And just before you continue, Phil, the Truth Sentinel website is www.truthsentinel.co.uk, and you can contribute topics on the chat room there and put in articles of your own. Sorry, please continue.
That's right. So Anthony posted the one about this sleep deprivation thing, and there was a guest 519, I think, who was talking about an Egyptian village blaming fires on evil spirits. So I had a quick look on the BBC website about this, and this fire basically sprang up in I think it was an apartment block, and some of the neighbours that came around, they had fire extinguishers, they had buckets of water and things like that, and they couldn't put the fire out. Didn't matter what they did, but it just wouldn't go out. The fire sort of seemed to be not possessed, but it seemed to have its own kind of its own mind, I guess. And a couple of villagers were talking about this, and they were sort of saying, like, this has got to be something to do with evil spirits. And it just reminded me of a film that I watched recently, a couple of years ago, as in recently, called The Conjuring, which was based on the true story of the place Harrisville Hauntings, which is a place in Rhode Island in the States. And this was back in 1970. And it was about the Perron family who were looking for a new home. And Roger and Carolyn Perron and their 5 young girls thought they'd found their dream home. And they didn't actually talk about the incidents for 30 years, I think, and then decided it was perhaps time to talk to some people about this. And the film was actually made out of it. And the film was, I don't think it was even loosely based on real events, apart from the ending, which was different to what actually happened. But most of the events in the film called The Conjuring were based on their record of what actually happened. And apparently every single family that had lived there, 8 generations of families had lived and died on the estate, and they'd experienced several suicides, a rape and a murder, 2 drownings, 4 men who mysteriously froze to death on the land, and it was just a spate of horrible goings on. And there were friendly ghosts there who played with the girls at first. There was a female ghost who would clean the rooms, and there was Manny, who was a boy that the girls...
Hang on a sec, Phil. Hang on a sec.
Yeah?
I had a female ghost that cleaned my room, and then later I found it was actually my mother.
Yeah. You probably need a female ghost to clean your room, Scott. I've heard about
I need one at the moment.
But... yeah, so there were some apparently friendly ghosts there, but there was a lot of poltergeist activity, levitation of objects, hovering of objects, including a telephone set that would hover above the actual set and then slam down as soon as someone entered the room. Things would move by themselves, glide around the house, and basically, after a few weeks of living there, some malevolent spirits seemed to start acting up. And they basically tortured the whole family. There was a possible molestation of the girls. One of the spirits tormented 8-year-old Cindy, repeatedly telling her that there were 7 dead soldiers buried in the wall. They had their legs pulled in their beds at night, their hair tugged and things like that.
I read the article as well, and I found some of it quite disturbing, and I had some questions. I mean, first of all, the molestation thing worried me somewhat. I mean, I'm not averse to believing in ghosts or anything, because I mean, I've actually seen an empty bottle of wine jump off a bookcase in front of my own eyes for no apparent reason. So I'm not averse to it, but when molestation occurs, you just wonder sometimes, you know.
How can that actually happen?
Yeah, and one of the ghosts used to kiss the girls good night, and just, you know, I don't know, it just concerned me somewhat. But what did you think, Anthony?
Look, I think it was a really interesting story, and we are going to talk about this on an upcoming episode. But it fascinated me that so much of it centered around the young girls, because this does seem to be a bit of a pattern with this poltergeist activity, whether you believe that it is supernatural or not. When these things happen, they do very often center around young people. So these are usually boys of just prepubescent age, or teenage girls. And I think that is a big mystery. Why those people? You know, there have been many theories about it, mostly about, you know, like spirits wanting to attach themselves to people who are undergoing great stress and things like this. But yeah, I think it's definitely one that's up in the air, still to be solved. And I am hoping that about the case of a young boy in the Ukraine called Sasha K, who in 1987 became the I guess a brief media star because he lived in a little village called Yenakievo, and he was doing all kinds of stuff in this village. Fires were breaking out around him, exploding light bulbs. The refrigerator turned itself upside down, and then the neighbors called the police, and the boy was quote unquote taken to Moscow. And it's very hard to find out anything about him between then and now. I've researched it at length, and I just cannot find what became of this boy. But getting back to the general point, yeah, I think there is some connection here between these strange occurrences like spontaneous fires and these sort of haunting incidents with people having their hair pulled and so on, and some energy that surrounds young people, and I don't know what that connection is.
And also, I mean, and by the way, again, I'm not saying that there aren't haunted houses and paranormal activity, not saying that at all, but I do think there is also, and I'm going to bring up an article in a moment, about small communities who kind of encourage stories to spread. That can sometimes happen as well. And usually on Truth Sentinel, we keep an open mind, but we also try and look at the possible explanations as well. Sorry, Phil, please.
Well, the interesting thing about this particular story for me was that it wasn't just this family, and it went back nearly 200 years to when the house was actually first built. And there was this woman, the main culprit apparently was this woman called Bathsheba Thayer, who they said was a witch. And it didn't only center around the children, and she seemed to have this connection, or she was perhaps lusting, they said, after Roger Perron, the father, and he had all these different sort of experiences around that, feeling a cold touch, a very gentle cold touch on him when he'd go down to the cellar to fix all these objects that had kept on being broken, and then even after the Perron family had to get out of there, because what happened in the film The Conjuring was that Ed and these two kind of ghost hunters, I guess, very famous ghost hunters in America, were called in to do an exorcism, and the exorcism failed, and the Perrons had to just said, like, let's get out of here, and so they left. And then after that, up until 1983, I think the home was, the current owner, Norma Sutcliffe, purchased the home in 1983, and she's saying as well, and her husband Jerry are saying that any visitors to the house, and then they themselves, have had really weird experiences, including doors banging, the sounds of people talking in other rooms, sounds of footsteps scurrying about the house, a chair beginning to vibrate in the study room, and the walls of the whole house actually vibrating to such an extent that they felt the house was going to fall apart. And they also said that just before they moved in, there was a contractor renovating the home, and he suddenly stopped work, and he ran off, leaving his car and all his tools behind, and he ran off screaming, never to return. And so it's weird that you just had this spate of instances for all these different people, all based around this one particular home itself. So
yeah, true.
So for me, that's.
I looked at the article, and I thought. If the experiences the family talked about were far more disturbing than the ones subsequent people talked about. The ones the other people talked about seemed to be, well, especially the things like, just bangs and things like that. They didn't seem to be quite as large. Like it seemed like the family went through horrific things. And I would, if that was happening to me, I would be out of that house within a week. But they stayed there. They stayed there 10 years. The skeptical side of me says, are the people who moved in afterwards, they probably knew about these stories, and they're bound to embellish things a little bit. They're bound to say, oh yeah, I heard a bang today. They certainly didn't sound as horrific as some of the things that happened to the previous family. That's the skeptical side of me, anyway. They just didn't sound as horrific. So it sounds like the family had a far more terrifying experience for 10 years as well. I mean, how long would you stay in that house, Anthony?
I wouldn't. Look, I lived in one flat in Ukraine. Something did seem to happen. I got a little tap on the shoulder at one point while I was home alone, and that freaked me out. But obviously, that was just a tap on the shoulder. If stuff started happening, if a poltergeist really started manifesting in the house, I'd just be out. I wouldn't see any point in staying.
Sorry. 5 young children.
Yes, yeah. That's the thing I'm talking about as well. Like, if your children were going through these experiences, I wouldn't stay there for a second longer. I just find it, it's disturbing anyway. But there are also, I think, real cases of these things happening. And
I know we need to move on. So just quickly, the reason why this this stuck out for me was because of an experience that I had when I was in Thailand, and I was living on the Burmese border. I tried to tell this story very quickly. I was living on the Burmese border in what we found out was an old refugee camp a long time ago. And we had a farm there, and it was we were basically looking after a small children's home, and it was on one side of the river. On the other side of the river was a Karen village, and the Karen are one of the ethnic minorities of Burma, what is now Myanmar.
Aren't they the ones with the neck rings?
No, that's a different one. Yeah. So this is just one of the Karen hill tribes. We were living in this on this farm. And we had a group of Australian teenagers there at the time, about 30 of them, and who were all busy working around the farm. And we heard this screaming, and it went on for about half an hour. And we didn't do anything about it because we often hear sort of noises going on from across the river, and we just figured people would sort it out. But after half an hour, this screaming kind of got to me, and I went up to my partner, Jim, the guy I was working with, and asked him, like, do you think we should go over and see what's happening? So we crossed the river, went over to where the screams came from, and there was a young boy sitting outside one of the bamboo huts, and he looked kind of nervous, not particularly scared or anything, but he was staying away. He looked like he was obviously sort of averse to going anywhere near the house. So we asked him what had gone on. And he said it was his sister. We looked went into the house, looked inside the room where his sister was, and his sister was about 12, 13 years old, and she was screaming her head off and terrified of something, and looked like she was having a fit, basically. And we tried to calm her down, we tried to speak to her, but she seemed absolutely oblivious of our presence. And then finally, the young boy, he was standing at the door by this time. He'd refused to come in until we'd been in there for about 5 minutes trying to calm this girl down. And then he ran to the other end of the room, picked up a string of beads from all the Karen houses have these small kind of shrines. Sometimes Buddhist shrines, sometimes just animist shrines. And he picked up this string of beads, and he quickly just kind of threw it over the girl's head, and she basically just collapsed on the floor and stopped screaming, was absolutely dead quiet, and looked like she was sleeping. And I placed my hand on her. I made sure she was still breathing okay and whatever, and I placed my left hand on her stomach. And immediately I got this sensation of, I started crying, and I have no idea why, but I just felt this deep sense of sorrow and a kind of an image of a mother. I don't know why it was a mother. It was just it wasn't like an image in my head as though it was a dream. It was just, I knew there was something about a mother that came into my head, and I was just in tears. And then a minute later, she woke up, looked around her, saw us, looked really embarrassed, and then walked out of the house to go and wash her face, and didn't come back. And so that was my experience, and it was just incredibly strange. And for me, there was something there that I couldn't explain to this day. Not necessarily possession or anything like that, but anyway, that's why I kind of had an interest in the Harrisville hauntings and possession and stuff.
Oh, that sounds like quite an experience. Does sound like a possession. I think these kind of things, if you experience them, that's when you know that there is some really strange stuff going on. I mean, when I was younger, I was brought up in a sort of Baptist church, and so there was like a demon cast out of someone who was sitting next to me, and I think anyone who ever witnesses that kind of thing, you know they're not acting. That's all I can say. It's quite, those kind of, when you see those first-hand experiences, there's no denying there's something going on. I don't know. What do you think, Anthony?
Yeah, absolutely. There's something going on. As to what it is, as I said before, I think this is a field where we've heard a lot of theories, but I don't think we're anywhere near getting to the bottom of it yet. Yeah, so I guess we will have to wait and see, but certainly cases like this one are very striking.
They are indeed, and we're running short of time, so let's finish with one story from myself. Yeah, so the article I came across that caught my eye was the boy accused of blasphemy who cut off his hand. We've put it in the chat room on Truth Sentinel, and basically it's about a Pakistani boy who cut off his own hand after he was publicly accused of blasphemy. The boy's name is Kaiser, although that's not his real name according to the article. He chopped off his right hand because he believed he'd committed blasphemy. This was because the cleric in the church, in the mosque where he was going, basically accused him of blasphemy after asking people in the congregation who didn't believe in the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, and he put his hand up mistakenly. And then the cleric accused him of blasphemy. So he went home and he used a fairly basic rustic machine that's used for cutting grass, I believe. It's basically a wheel with a blade on it, and cut off his own hand. And looking further into the story, it seems to me that it wasn't just out of devotion. It could also have been out of fear. In Pakistan, if you're accused of blasphemy, he wouldn't have been the first person that might have been set upon by a mob. So I'm thinking initially also that he may have done it out of fear. But anyway, he got a lot of respect from people in the community. People have come to visit him and to encourage him. He went back to the mosque afterwards and showed what he'd done, and they took him to hospital. But everyone's been full of praise for him, basically. And I thought it brought up some interesting issues of sort of control, small communities and how they control each other, but also of illiteracy. I mean, a lot of people in this village are illiterate. They can't, so the only information they get is word of mouth from each other. And I was thinking, I thought the first question I would ask you guys, well, two questions. Do you think illiteracy is a powerful thing? I mean, based on this story, and if you had grown up in this village, do you think you might have turned out the same?
Very, very interesting question. I remember growing up having several discussions with my father, who is a staunch Catholic, to the effect of me saying, look, if you'd been born in India, you'd be a staunch Hindu. If you'd been born in Egypt, you'd be a staunch Muslim. Why should I follow in your footsteps just because we were both born here in Australia? And those were, luckily my father's a very patient man. But I think it's unfortunately it is true that to some extent we are a product of our environment, and it operates on all kinds of subtle levels. And look, this is an issue specifically within the federally administered tribal areas of Pakistan, and the central authorities there have undertaken long campaigns to try to weed out some of these superstitions. But it is a very difficult thing. I mean, to give you just one example, in those federally administered tribal areas, immunization programs have been a total failure against polio, for example. And polio has re-emerged in Pakistan as well as Afghanistan. And the reason why is because there is a widespread belief there that vaccinations are an American ploy to sterilize Muslim populations. And also, it's commonly believed that that vaccination is an attempt to avert the will of Allah. So the Taliban have assassinated vaccination officials, and they've issued fatwas on anybody who administers a vaccination, and kidnapped and beaten people, and it's very difficult to avoid being somewhat affected, I guess. If you're growing up in that kind of environment, it would be very unusual for somebody not to have their opinions swayed at all when they see all of that kind of stuff going on around them.
Well, vaccinations, that's another topic we can discuss.
Well, it is, and it is a controversial one, but I think it's just illustrative of the fact that there are some very strong views in these places, and I think that you are bound to be affected by what's in your immediate surrounds, just as you're bound to be affected by being in contact with the truth movement and hearing some of the allegations that are made about what's happening with vaccinations. In the truth movement, some of them are plausible, some of them are less so. But as you said, that's another episode. But I'm just saying, there's a lot of stuff happening in those tribal areas that is very difficult to change. The federal authorities of Pakistan have been trying for a long time and are not making much progress.
Yeah, and apparently if you call for change of the laws, the blasphemy laws in Pakistan, then you're also going to be a target and possibly killed as well. But I thought this story also brought up, sort of highlighted the power of small communities to control, the power of religion to control, the power of thought in people's heads and minds, ideas to develop, so that to the point where someone thinks it's a good idea to cut off a perfectly good hand. What did you think about this story, Phil?
Well, first of all, you asked earlier about whether I think I would be doing the same thing if I was brought up in that place. And I'd like to sort of think that I wouldn't, but I think that would just be my ego talking, and a kind of arrogant part of my ego talking, because I have this fairly firm belief that if, for example, I was brought up in exactly the same way and went through exactly the same experiences as one of the kind of corrupt bankers who've been around for the last 20 years, I think I'd be doing the same thing as them. And I think I'd be doing it out of fear, because I really believe that, for example, with the example I gave about bankers and financiers and so on, I think they have this incredibly deep fear of scarcity, that they're going to lose all the money that they have, so they always want more. And I think most of these sort of incidents, things like this boy cutting off his hand, or the things that many of us kind of look around, especially in the truth movement, kind of looking around the world and seeing all these horrific things that people are doing, the cutting down of rainforests, the hoarding of huge amounts of money amongst a very, very small amount of the world population. I think these things are all based around a fear. And it's like you said, Scott, it's about control. And it's not so long ago that the Christian religion was kind of doing similar sort of things. Like the Christianity was hugely based around the fear that we'd go to hell, or the fear that we're going to be tempted by the devil and things like this. And I don't think any of it. Can
I just say, Phil, just because I think this does, if people accept this idea, it does skew our worldview a little bit back in the opposite direction to how the mainstream media are trying to skew it at the moment. When you said that until recently the Christian religion was up to these tricks as well, I would argue that the Christian religion still is up to these tricks. They've simply changed their focus from Europe to Africa, and so you've got a lot of clerics in African countries, for example, short-circuiting any attempts at basic sex education, and substituting those with the idea that if you wear a condom, you won't get to heaven, and that is killing hundreds of thousands of people in countries where HIV is at epidemic proportions. So the Christian Church has not stopped doing this at all. They've just moved because basically, in most of the European countries that used to provide it its base, the education system has progressed too far for most people to believe what the church tells them in matters like contraception. So to get back to the topic that we were talking about, Scott was saying small groups and small communities can be influenced like this. I think that's an excellent case. When you're talking about religions, we're no longer talking about small communities necessarily. Sometimes we're talking about whole nations and whole faiths that are influenced.
And I think what you said is absolutely right. I think my main point was that that all religions and many kind of organizations, I guess, many belief systems all around the world, it doesn't matter where they are, have been kind of based on a sort of sense of fear. And I think that's something to do with humanity not really knowing how to deal with this particular emotion, with fear itself. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if it's to do with a mainstream religion or a small community or a tribe. I think the principles are basically the same. And I guess I was just saying, like, if I'd have grown up in a tribe like this and I had a community kind of influencing my belief systems, again, we go back to this kind of subconscious intake of information over a period of your lifetime, I'd be instilled with this fear that if I don't do what I think is the right thing in that instant, I'm going to suffer for it. I'm going to suffer greatly for it. So basically, maybe I just kind of cut my suffering short and get it all over and done with now and cut off my hand, and then maybe I'll be saved. I think it's not so different with exactly what you were saying about the Christianity in Africa or pretty much any other religion doing whatever they're doing to try and spread their word or whatever.
We're going to have to wrap up in a minute. I just wanted to add that I think fear isn't just used by religious people. I think it's used by humans in general to get people to do things, to manipulate people, even down to more innocent things like parents telling children they've got to eat their vegetables or they're not going to grow up big and strong, or they need to do their homework, otherwise they're going to fail in life and not be successful. I think it's used by people all the time, so that might just be expressed in religions as well. You know, it's been expressed by humans all the time.
I think that's a fair point, Scott. It's true. It's easy to single out religious organizations because they do it in such a kind of public way, I suppose. Yeah, you could say. But also if you look at the advertising industry, you know, like the holy grail, or one of the holy grails in the advertising industry is finding a new thing to make women afraid of, especially if it's a new smell or a new leak or something like this that previously just seemed like a normal part of life. If they can turn that into a fear, then they can sell a product which will assuage that fear, and that's how it works. And it's extremely insidious. And like you said, I think it's in some ways it's kind of inherent in human nature.
Yeah, indeed. And just to finish, I wanted to mention also about education. Like we've talked about it in the past. I think me and Phil talked about education as being a form of control, which I do strongly believe. But at the same time, a basic education could stop some of these things, you know, literacy as well, being able to read what's going on in the world, and if people could read, you know, and read things on the internet, maybe some of these things that happen in small communities wouldn't happen. Anthony, to finish today, you had another story you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, look, last month on a website called Rosbalt, there was a really interesting story. Rosbalt is a Russian news organization which was in Putin's pocket for quite a while, but they've had a fairly serious falling out. Putin shut them down for a while, but somehow they're back, and they're back with a really remarkable interview, I think. It's with a recently retired soldier, and in the interview he talks about how a lot of the Russian military and paramilitary guys who were sent into Ukraine now feel that they've been betrayed. To the point where, according to him, they've begun, quote unquote, cleansing some of the upper ranks. And he says that this is true on both sides. Now, I don't know if he's right, but there have been a number of key military commanders bumped off in the Donbass this year. So what he says kind of does at least accord with the facts as we know them. He also discusses the theory that there are war profiteers in Ukraine, and he says a lot of the fighting has actually been a way to channel resources into the hands of those people. Bear in mind that the Donbass, where the fighting has taken place, is a coal and timber producing area. So there are stories of individual leaders getting shipments out of the war zone, using military detachments to help them. There'll be like a battle which will take place, but the battle will be actually a way of diverting attention so that a trainload of coal can be taken somewhere, for example. And look, there have also been incidents where senior commanders have assassinated each other, according to this guy, almost like a kind of mob-style turf war. But look, even more than that, this guy claims that the people right at the top, in Kiev and Moscow, are the ones who are gaining from this. So the impression that you get when you read this interview, you've had Russians and Ukrainians fighting each other for almost 2 years now. But in the last 6 months or so, there's been a kind of gradual realization on both sides that the real enemy is entrenched in government and parliament. I just quoted a bit of the interview there. This soldier, Alexei, says he got sucked in by these people, howling on TV about the fascists in Ukraine and so on. But now he understands that all those people doing the howling in the Russian media didn't actually believe any of it at all. And it was basically a way to get people into a battlefield where they would die in order to make others rich. Now, I would just add a note of caution here that Alexei is a true believer in the mission of Novorossiya, which is basically the annexation of Ukraine, and that's the idea that he was wanting to fight for. But whether we like that or not, he's saying people in Russia were sold an ideological war, whereas in fact they've got a resource war, and the war is being fought by the poor on behalf of the rich. Now, of course, that will be familiar to anyone who's been following, the US and the UK and their incursions into the Middle East over the last quarter of a century, and especially the invasion of Iraq. We've heard all about the war profiteering of Halliburton and Blackwater and Tony Blair and so on. And it's embarrassingly clear now that that was a major motivation for going into Iraq, redistributing taxpayers' money into the hands of corporate America using an army. So from that point of view, if this Alexei is right, then it's really interesting to hear this coming from somebody in another major military power who's engaged in another struggle, because he's telling us similar kinds of things about his government that we've heard about, Washington and Whitehall and so on. Even more interesting than that, I think, is his claim that the soldiers there aren't just regretting what they've done. They're actually now starting to clean out the upper ranks, which basically would amount to armed mutiny. Now, I don't know if that's going to happen, but it would be quite astonishing if it did. And I'm really looking forward to hearing any more developments that might come out of this. So I don't know. I wondered what you guys think. Is it interesting to you to kind of hear echoes of that sense of betrayal that we know of in another war?
It doesn't actually surprise me at all, because I think that just about every war is sold to the people for one reason, but is usually about resources. I think most people think that war is acceptable if it's for self-defense, but I can't think of many wars in history that you can actually honestly say were about self-defense. I think they were all about selling an idea, and then it was really all about money, basically. So it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. But I suppose it's good that some people have start to change their minds, but again, that doesn't surprise me either. Once people are sold something, then actually go and fight, they probably see things from a different point of view. But again, I think when it comes to war reporting and stories and articles about the war, it's very difficult to know who's telling the truth as well. What do you think, Phil?
I find it really encouraging, and I'm not sure if encouraging is the right word, but I think I see more and more of this willingness to look behind the scenes, to look beyond, sort of beneath the surface of what's going on, especially in wars. So we see this with, as Anthony said, we see this with the Iraq War, for example, and with what's been going on with American interests and British interests over the past sort of few years, especially with the war on terror. And we've also seen it in other arenas of life. So, for example, with the banking system and what the Icelandic people did as a response to the 2004 sort of banking crisis. They realized they realized who was basically involved. They kind of went straight to the source rather than kind of blaming who is often put up as a scapegoat. They just got rid of the bankers and the politicians, whereas in every other country, the bankers got off scot-free and actually got bailed out by taxpayers' money, and no politician ever kind of stood up as and took responsibility. So this for me kind of is a bit of an insight into what is happening in humanity as a whole around the world. The kind of common folk, if you like, are not so easy to be manipulated, and to be blamed and to be the sort of scapegoats for the rich and the powerful. It seems like they can see a bit more clearly, who's at fault for any manipulation, for any kind of greediness, I guess. I don't know if you guys agree with that.
Perhaps this is a function of the information age. I mean, we definitely see, we see the powers that be trying to control information very strongly, especially in countries like Russia and Ukraine. We see things like Russia Today, which is wholly owned by the Russian government, but kind of masquerading as a news network and presenting a particular vision of the world. Which would encourage people in Russia to go, oh, wow, our country's under threat, we better go and defend it. Whereas, in fact, that's just not an issue at all and never has been. So we see the powers that be trying to take the information into their own hands and trying really hard to kind of manipulate it and massage it. And perhaps that is a response, in some ways, to the fact that information is now out there for people to consume if they want to, and some of them are.
Yeah, exactly. I always thought the internet and the amount of information and the speed at which people could get it is going to change the world, and I think it is. So that's a nice positive note to finish on today, because we sadly have run out of time, but we can talk about some of these issues again and talk about new news stories that we come across. But also I wanted to say about, Phil mentioned about this Egyptian fires that people believe are being started by the demons or the jinn, and we've talked about fear, and just wanted to mention that we've done episodes on some of these topics. We've done episodes on Egyptian pyramids, on the jinn with Rosemary Ellen Guiley and Sean Stone, and we've done episodes on psychology of fear. So maybe check those out on YouTube. And I just wanted to thank you both for joining us today, and I hope you'll come back again soon.
Certainly will. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Scott.
Okay, goodbye, guys.
Bye. See you.
Bye.
So let me know what you think about some of the things we've spoken about today and in previous episodes as well. You can leave comments in the chat room at www.truthsentinel.co.uk. You'll also find a voicemail there. You can leave a comment and we'll put it on the next show and we'll respond to your comments. Our voicemail is a kind of our phone-in substitute. You can suggest new topics there and also guests, and we'll do our best to try and get them on. You can also find us on YouTube. Just type in Truth Sentinel with Scott and you should find 2 channels come up. Subscribe to them both and you'll find the playlist of all the episodes, more than 50 episodes at the moment. We've also teamed up with trutht-shirts.com. That's trutht-shirts.com. They do conspiracy type t-shirts and truth type t-shirts, and they're all very reasonably priced, under $20. They can customize t-shirts for you as well, and hoodies. If you use the code TRUTH1, that's TRUTH1, that's a special discount for Truth Sentinel listeners. You get the discount, 10% discount, and we get a small donation, so it could help fund our channel as well. I just wanted to say that we really do appreciate any donations. It really does help us to spend more time doing this, and also to upgrade technology so we can produce shows in the future. And also, if you feel like you could help out in any way with our channel, maybe by booking guests or anything else, please contact us, scottsentinel9@gmail.com. So thanks very much for listening, and speak to you again soon.